Hello everyone, my name is Brianna Haruz, and I will be talking to you today about how I believe the disappearance of the fountain changed art forever. I will be discussing the artist Marcel Duchamp, the art of ready-made sculptures, and of course the famous sculpture and disappearance of the fountain in particular. Before I get started, here is some insight on what will be discussed throughout my presentation today. First, I will deliver a brief summary on Marcel Duchamp's career and life story. Next, we can see how the art of ready-made sculptures contributed to Duchamp's creation of the fountain from 1917. Then we will have a look into the background of the fountain and its disappearance, which will lead us into an in-depth formal analysis of this sculptural work. First, I would like to begin by presenting my thesis statement and main argument. If not for the mysterious disappearance of Marcel Duchamp's fountain from 1917 and the impact of its replications, ready-made sculptures would arguably not have been as successful, and the fountain from 1917 would have been forgotten. Our first step will be a discussion and summary of Marcel Duchamp. A 2016 article titled "Art Fighting Its Way Back to Aesthetics: Revisiting Marcel Duchamp's Fountain," written by Anne Seiton, describes Marcel as a shifter between modern art and contemporary art. Anne states, "Duchamp as a shifter, bridging back and forth between modern art and contemporary art, allows us to think contemporary art more as an aesthetic category than as a historical period." Henri Robert Marcel Duchamp was born in Normandy, France, July 1887, and died in Neuilly, France, October 1968. In the article Marcel Duchamp and the Viewer, published online in 2021, author Dr. Marc Pollard describes Duchamp as an artist who repeatedly redefined art in the 20th century. He practiced a multitude of art forms such as painting, sculpting, and writing. Duchamp became a well-known French Dada artist, also known as the father of conceptual art. Marcel Duchamp was one of the most influential Dada leaders and one of the earliest developers of 20th century art. Although Duchamp never claimed the true title of a Dadaist, he was definitely a leader of Dadaism. Traditional notions of art and art-making were challenged by the Dada movement and Marcel Duchamp. He contributed to the artist's freedom under artistic rights by freeing artists from the congenital curse of art history and the morality of artistic judgment. He coined the term ready-made, which meant sculpture works made from manufactured objects. This term is used to describe ordinary prefabricated objects selected by an artist and presented as art. Sometimes the object is altered, such as by combining it with another object to make an assisted ready-made. In Wayne Anderson's 2011 book called Marcel Duchamp, The Failed Messiah, he incorporates a direct quote from Marcel Duchamp stating, "I want to clarify our understanding of the word art without attempting to make a hard definition." Duchamp continues to say, "Art may be good, bad, or indifferent, but whatever adjective is used, we must call it art. Bad art is still art in the same way as a bad emotion is still an emotion." Duchamp's ready-made sculptures transformed sculpture in particular by taking ordinary objects of life and displaying them so as to remove their useful significance and give them a new title and point of view by creating a new thought for that object. The controversial ready-made transformed the concept of art in general by directly challenging social conventions, defied the notion that art must be beautiful or pleasing to the eye, and focused on the values of artists' concepts. Quite interestingly, these sculptures continue to challenge and confound artists today. As seen above, the first ready-made was of a bicycle wheel mounted upside down on a stool seat presented by Marcel Duchamp. When confronted with ready-made sculptures, people often ask questions such as, what are we to make of such an object? Why does it qualify as a work of art? Is any object a potential ready-made, and can anyone make one? To understand the significance of ready-made sculptures, I would like to compare some of their aspects to traditional sculptures. Traditional sculptures used materials such as stone, marble, limestone, clay, metal, and bronze, whereas the term ready-made literally means something that is already made. Ready-made sculpture art emphasized the viewer's role and response by practicing notions of visual perception. Often, traditional sculpture artists intended for their work to be interpreted in a particular way, as opposed to ready-made sculptures inviting us to comprehend contemporary art in terms other than those of its alleged dissolution in cyberspace. Ready-mades became a matter of increasing the possibilities of art as much as possible and of experimenting as much as possible. The art of ready-made sculptures contributed to Duchamp's creation of the fountain in which he is most known for. According to author Robert Kilroy, in his 2018 book titled Marcel Duchamp's Fountain 100 Years Later, this upturned urinal was recently voted the most influential work of art of the 20th century and remains one of the most widely discussed and closely examined objects in art history. Anne Seitan argues in her article, Contemporary Art Confirms When We Comprehend It Through Duchamp's Fountain, that art in general is something that can be constructed and deconstructed, built up and decomposed beyond any limit, and, consequently, that this plasticity somehow constitutes the nature of art. In 1917, Duchamp participated in a democratic group called the Society of Independent Artists, who organized exhibitions only requiring artists to contribute $1 entry fees for their submissions and a $5 fee for yearly dues. In an attempt to test the Society's unjuried inclusiveness, Duchamp submitted the fountain, a men's porcelain urinal turned on its side, to the Grand Central Palace in New York under the name of R. Mutt. Although the dimensions of this piece are unconfirmed, they are estimated to have measured at 14 inches by 18 inches by 24 inches. The Society's board of directors rejected the sculpture on the grounds that the fountain was not art and it was indecent. Another objector called the piece a joke. Louisburg argues that with this logic, if joke and art are to be mutually exclusive terms, then because fountain has become art, it cannot be considered a joke. Anderson is quoted saying, "Secure in a universal definition of art, it wouldn't have occurred to the organizing members that the exhibition would be called upon to test what a work of art is in opposition to what it is not." Bluntly, without a bit of judicial compassion, the installation committee, confronted by this urinal that looked exactly like a urinal and like nothing else, ignored the jury-free policy, acted as a jury, and rejected it as simply not art, not even having a semblance of art. Anne Seitan argues that the true lesson of Duchamp's ready-made is the aesthetic resistance and that this iconic figure keeps challenging us. She continues to say, Fountain's sensational appearance, as well as its extraordinary aftermath throughout modern art history, rejoins aesthetics more than it leaves aesthetics behind it, as far as it succeeds in creating a kind of foreign language that derealizes reality. Such language is symbolic and not merely symptomatic, because, once diagnosed, the symptom would explain the cause of the artwork becoming subsequently poorer and less interesting. The original sculpture has been lost, but a replica of it is located at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There are many replicas that have been created by other artists but commissioned by Duchamp, such as Sidney Janis in 1950, Ulf Lindh in 1963, and Arturo Schwartz in 1964. The photograph that preserves this original sculpture was taken by a man named Alfred Stieglitz. So, you have to be wondering, where on earth did the fountain go? According to a critical essay written in 2012 titled A Fountain, a Spontaneous Combustion, and the Mona Lisa, author Jonathan Louisburg walks the reader through the last steps before the fountain's disappearance. He says that regardless of the fountain's rejection, Duchamp sent the urinal to photographer Alfred Stieglitz. He then spent a few days photographing it and exhibiting it in his studio. However, after the fountain's temporary stay in Stieglitz's studio, it mysteriously disappeared forever. Today, whenever it may be, Having been abandoned, lost, or junked, this urinal is much more on the art world's mind than in 1917 when newly purchased and not put to its designed use. He states, "Only after it ceased to exist as an object did it become an uncontested artwork," meaning once the fountain disappeared, there was less push against the artwork's meaning and the artist's intentions. It makes you wonder if this disappearance was intentional. Let me know what you think in the comments section of my presentation. As mentioned in the previous slide, replicas commissioned by Duchamp have been created by other artists, and there are a few interesting stories regarding the vandalism they have encountered. For instance, in January of 2006, at the Paris Pompidou Center, a replica of the urinal was on exhibit when a very frustrated artist attacked it with a small hammer, chipping at the porcelain. The plot thickens. In 1993, this same person attempted to actually urinate in the urinal on display at an art museum in Nimes. Anderson poses the question, had he succeeded, would the urinal have been again a urinal? In order for me to perform a proper formal analysis of the fountain, I would like to address individual formal components, from form, color, and texture, as well as context and subject matter. It is important to discuss all of these characteristics in order for us to understand the depth and magnitude of Duchamp's sculpture, The Fountain. Pictured above is Marcel Duchamp smoking in front of the exhibition of his work at the Pasadena Museum of Art. This piece is clearly composed and formed in the shape and structure of a urinal, because it is a real urinal. It is made out of porcelain. Duchamp hardly changed anything about this ready-made urinal, except that he decided to put it on its side, incorporated a hastily written signature reading R. Mutt, 1917, in black paint mysteriously on the left-hand side, and titled it Fountain. The color of this piece is white glazed porcelain with the stark black signature. The viewer's eye can move across this piece by following the curved and wavy lines from the top of the figure down to the front rounded belly portion of the fountain. There appears to be two parallel lines bordering the entire piece. The surface reads as a smooth glazed texture, and because this object has been taken from everyday life and placed on an art exhibition pedestal, it has the same proportions as a normal urinal, except for it has been turned on its side, giving us a new perspective. The fountain is lit up by the overhead lighting, which allows for areas towards the front of the urinal to be highlighted with higher contrast, such as the rounded body and light falling directly onto the bordering edge. Due to this overhead spotlight, the shadows form a unique shape inside of the piece. This gives the viewer a sense of definition and brings it back into a three-dimensional space. The circle in the bottom center of the fountain stays the focal point that catches the viewer's eye because of how dark black it is in comparison to the rest of the piece. I also think the 6 holes in the back drain stand out as well. The function of Duchamp's fountain was intended to be presented at the Grand Central Palace in New York in an attempt to test the Society of Independent Artists' unjuried inclusiveness. Kilroy argues an interesting thought that Duchamp's intended audience might have been a specific viewer, one that might not emerge until 100 years after his work's initial reception. Is it possible for the true audience for whom Duchamp was waiting for is only now appearing 100 years later? As Anderson explains in his book, if you erase the context of Duchamp's objects, they will revert back to being simply just an object. He goes on to say, remove the urinal from its art world context, put it in a flea market or a garage sale, and it will revert to being a urinal. In other words, Duchamp's objects become art not by stimulating recognition of them as art, but by applied recognition. Duchamp's urinal became a fountain when Duchamp said it was a fountain and a quorum of art experts agreed. The subject depicts a porcelain urinal turned on its side with the inscription R. Mutt, 1917 in black paint in a black and white photograph. In conclusion, if not for the major impact of the mysterious disappearance of Marcel Duchamp's fountain from 1917 and the attention from its replications to follow, ready-made sculptures would not have been as successful as they are today, and the fountain from 1917 would have been nothing but a forgotten memory. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation on Marcel Duchamp, ready-made sculptures, and the fountain. Thank you.